Hey everyone, welcome to today's show and tell. If you haven't been here before, show and tell is our live stream where the TBD team shows and tells you about the latest open source project or concept at TBD or any updates we may have for you, because we love being open about what we're working on. So during the show, whether you're on Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or Discord, you can drop questions in the chat and we will answer them during the show. And if we don't answer during, we'll answer it after the show. I'm your host and moderator, Tanya, and joining us as our speaker for the day is Gabe.
Hi, I'm Gabe.
Feel free to say, well, you said hi already, but feel free to quickly introduce yourself. Tell everyone a bit about what you do at TBD.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Gabe. I've been at TBD for just over 2.5 years. I work on open standards. So what that means is I do split work between different standards groups that we're in, like DIF and the W3C and the OpenID Foundation and some others, which I'll get into, as well as helping the team figure out which standards we want to implement today, in the future, and how it affects the products that we build. So kind of bridging that gap, advocating for our needs, as well as helping out with some of the engineering behind those standards.
Awesome. Alrighty. So, what is today's topic for our show and tell? And you
Yeah,
can
so I'll
get
be
right
giving
into it.
an okay. Yeah, I'm happy to share. I have some slides, and I'll give a brief update over the current state of standards, both at TBD and in the broader community, and where we're thinking about going next for at least this year. And I'm happy to take questions at any time, so feel free to enter your questions whenever you have them. Present.
There you go.
All right. Cool. So yeah, I like to do these quarterly, at least internally. This is a quick one, but this is what's true as of this quarter, which just started. So a brief overview of what open standards at TBD entails. I touched on this, but I'll give some more detail. So pretty much everything we do at TBD is enabled and strengthened by open standards. Our Web5 project is the closest to open standards. Everything we do, whether it's DIDs or VCs or the protocols that enable sharing them, they're all based on these standards. And they could be at different places in development, whether they're kind of internal to us or in one of these larger groups that could even have broad international adoption. So it's kind of a fun puzzle to figure out how all the pieces of different standards fit together, can work with each other, and where we want to make changes. So yeah, I mentioned DIDs and VCs. I want to make this point that um, we say DIDs and VCs, but really there are many, many different types of these standards. There are different models for identification on the web, and there are different formats for verifiable data, whether it's W3C credentials or the data models at ISO with MDLs or at the IETF, which I could touch on a little bit later. Um, so it's really these broad concepts that we make decisions on um, which standards we choose to use. And yeah, there are all these protocols around them. The ones that we've started implementing, which you've seen in our open source software, are mostly around OpenID Connect for verifiable credentials. And we're just beginning to look at establishing trust for TBDX itself, um, which is this broader concept of a trust framework that has a lot of prior art and excitement in the standards world, which I'll talk about later. All right, so my responsibilities really just ensure that across our stack, all the software we put out there, there's consistency. There's a lot of room for interpretation in many of the standards, and making sure that we have a common understanding of what we're building and building against is really helpful. And the main ways this shows up is by having clear specifications. You've likely seen our Web5 spec and TBDX spec. These are two good examples of doing just that, taking a number of specs that exist out in the world and ones that we're trying to create ourselves, like the TBDX protocol, and being really clear about the features that we need to implement to have broad interoperability. And that interoperability is really key to engage with partners and create this kind of flowing ecosystem that we want to see, where data and identity can be personal and cross organizational boundaries. And that only works if we have these standards that enable that fair and consistent rules. Another thing is partially for us as TBD to help influence standards. You might have a perspective that a lot of standards on the web are driven by large tech companies like Google or Facebook or Apple, who has iPhones, of course. And for credentials, this is really important because we don't want a world where Google and Apple are making all the choices and maybe being a little bit protective of their ecosystems. We're trying to create an open and even playing field. So establishing TBD, lifting the voice of the community and different organizational needs past the big players is really important. So that's another thing I'm pretty mindful of. And then lastly, making sure that we're implementing different standards that fit our product needs and look forward to say, how can we improve things? One example of this would be including selective disclosure credentials. Today, we haven't really explored that much. We've taken more of a standard credential approach, which is good and necessary. But if we're looking for ways to make things better, more private, put users in more control, then selective disclosure is one of those areas where we could pull on and line up for a future release. All right, so which standards bodies are we investing in? The Decentralized Identity Foundation is one that we've joined since the beginning of TBD. One of our leaders, Daniel Buckner, helped found DIF, and it's really viewed as a strong incubation org. A lot of important standards like centralized web nodes, presentation exchange, and some work on trust establishment have been happening in DIF, and it's something we stay engaged with. The W3C is probably the most prominent organization today for the standards that we rely on because they've defined DIDs and W3C verifiable credentials, which really coined the term verifiable credentials and kicked off this broader movement across different ecosystems of what verifiable credentials should be. And the W3C has historically been successful in defining standards for the web like HTML, CSS, different browser APIs. And it's kind of viewed as a place where you go to get broad web adoption. So it's really important that we keep advocating in the W3C for how to use these credentials in a common way and across all web experiences. Now, the W3C doesn't do everything. We also work with the OpenID Foundation, which TBD joined last year, to handle more of the protocols that aren't necessarily web-based. What I mean by that is you may not need a browser to use them. It could just be back-end web services between your phone or a server or a local application. OpenID is a long-standing protocol that I'm sure many of you have used, and they've done a really clever thing where they said all these really large organizations across different sectors, education, government, banking, social media, use OpenID Connect anytime you sign in with anything. And wouldn't it be great to extend that existing capabilities for verifiable credentials and DIDs? So we're heavily engaged there to make sure that the next version of the OpenID specs support VCs and DIDs and help communicate how different credentials are shared across different environments and how you can apply for credentials and how you can authenticate with DIDs across different services. There's also some work there around the OpenID Federation, which is on that trust framework topic. And the Federation is kind of a way to say, if you authenticate with me, then we could trust you in a different context and vice versa. So eventually you could view it kind of in the lens of PBDX. If you on board with one financial institution, you could use OpenID Federation to communicate that and be trusted by another financial institution without having to onboard and go through a similar authentication process. I did want to call out there are other standards orgs, some captured here and others not. Like City Hub is kind of global effort that we've lightly been involved in to see how different governments across the world are thinking about identity for a broad array of use cases. And the IETF, a lot of new work is kicking off there to define different types of formats, something like selective disclosure JOTs. And they're also having their own verifiable credentials data model as opposed to the W3C one, and similarly, their own status list mechanism as well. So I wouldn't view them necessarily as competing with the W3C, but just an additional effort that kind of sees the world a different way, and that's a good thing. There doesn't need to be a one size fits all model. So we want to be broadly involved in these efforts and see what makes sense when. All right. So the current state of things. So we define this interop profile for TBDEX, and it's kind of a way to make these decisions on which standards, which version of standards we're using to prove out interoperability on TBDEX. So we define this, we chose a few DID methods, key types, way you authenticate, formats for verifiable credentials, protocols for exchanging those credentials, representing status, and TBDEX messages. And we view this as really a starting place for enabling interop on TBDEX. Certainly there are other aspects of interoperability, like making sure that the currency pairs that people are exchanging are compatible with one another, and trust is communicated in a similar way, and there are legal and compliance considerations met consistently, but this could be viewed as like a technical interop profile that we're following through on. And we've implemented this today across our SDKs and are sharing it with our partners that are going to be onboarding to TBDEX. The more you immerse yourself in these different standards efforts, the more you'll see different interop profiles. It's a common practice. DIF has one, the EU has one. There are many actually in the EU that communicate how different sets of services and applications can use common standards to interop with one another. So it's really important that we've defined this as a starting place for interoperability in our ecosystem. We've done a lot. So some more callouts, as I mentioned earlier, this uptake of OpenID for VC. We have some public code for this, but most of it is private so far. The next effort will be including OpenID for VC, the family of specifications. It's not just one. It's SIOP v2, which allows you to authenticate, OpenID for VCI, which handles issuance, and OpenID for VP, which handles presentation. We're going to be including these standards in our Web5 specs going forward so that it's easier for folks to use these protocols when building their applications. You will see it today in our known customer credential KCC spec. That's, I think, the only public place it shows up today, but it will be in more soon. I see a question.
Yeah, quick question from Rizal. She asks, when are we looking to support selective disclosure?
It's a good question. It's also a little complicated. I will get to it in a couple slides, so please hold on to that question. So as I mentioned earlier, there are many different identity models and credential models. We've picked the W3C ID stack, which gives us flexibility across different DID methods. We've chosen DID JWK, DID Web, and our own DID DHT as options for different use cases, as well as implementing 1.1 of the data model and the status list that goes along with it. And the SDKs we have today support these standards. Interop profile have test vectors to ensure that interoperability, and we have implementation across 6 languages. That's something we're starting to work on and have made great progress on, is transitioning to a Rust core so that we're able to more easily maintain all the SDKs that we want to put out there. And I'll get into that a bit more on future slides. So I touched on this briefly, but most of my time today is spent in this W3C area. The version 2 of the W3C VC data model is actively being worked on. It's in something called candidate recommendation right now, which is, I think, the second to last step before it's seen as an international standard. And this data model makes a number of improvements on the V1.1 that we have implemented today. It makes it a lot easier to create different types of credentials without knowing about certain technologies like JSON LD. It adds more clarity around how to secure it using JOTs, and it does enable things like selective disclosure. So that's one area of focus that we're investing in. So, result to your question, with the V2 data model, we will be able to use selective disclosure, and the main thing that piece of work that enables that is this work item called VC Jose Cose, which I'll get into a little bit more in the next slide. But the general spec, have a link here, allows you to join the chat. Maybe I'll put it in here. It allows you to secure the verifiable credentials data model with Jose, which is JavaScript object signing and encryption, and Cose, which is the same thing but for CBOR. And if you've ever used JOTS or JWS, it's going to be familiar to you. And we also support SDJOT in there. So that's what that spec is doing. Moving on. Yeah, okay. So as I was saying, yes, the V2 data model, that's the biggest thing we're working on. And it's not just one spec, it's kind of this family of specs that enable this nicer credentials ecosystem. The V1.1 has seen great adoption throughout the world. So we're hoping to make some improvements given all the implementation feedback we've heard around how you define different fields, how you communicate status consistently, how you secure these credentials. And yeah, two of the efforts that I'm focused on are that VC Jose and Cose, which does enable selective disclosure, relying on the OAuth SDJOT specification, as well as verifiable credential JSON schema, which Andreas and I helped create most of it. It lets you create a JSON schema. So if you've ever used it, it's a simple JSON file. You define all the terms, the required fields, regular expressions if you have them for different properties, and you're able to validate that the credential you have has the data that you expect. So these are all progressing nicely, and we're hoping that by the end of the year, they'll be rolled out and more ready to use. I can't say too much, but I do know that some governments in the US and outside of it have already committed to adopting these specifications. So the work that we're doing here at TBD has some pretty big reach. And of course, we'll be adopting it in our own stack as well. All right, so that's W3C. VC. So another thing that's happened recently is the DID working group has been rechartered. And briefly on charters, these W3C working groups usually have what's called a charter. It's pretty much a statement of work saying, we want to run this group for 2 years and accomplish all these different work items, to specify things further, to prove out interoperability, to have test suites, stuff like that. And the 1.0 of centralized identifiers was released almost over 2 years ago. And from that time, there have been a number of issues opened on their GitHub repo, as well as feedback from the community on how we can make DIDs better. So this April, this group was rechartered, and we've kicked off meetings every week, sometimes multiple times a week, to begin working on improving DIDs themselves, as well as resolution. And the main goal of this working group is to improve DID resolution, which we see as the key to interoperability in the space. You may be familiar with the universal resolver from diff, and it's kind of this way to access key material and other properties in did documents consistently across did methods. And that's a great piece of software, but it's also not a standard yet. It's kind of using some knowledge of the community, and we really want to make it more formal and better tested and better defined so that we could use DIDs more consistently across the internet. And a common question I get is, why are there 190 DID methods and growing? And how do I know which one to use? And how do I make sure that they're going to be supported where I need them? So one way to address that question is by standardizing resolution and making sure that no matter the DID method you use, there's a consistent way to access its data. So that's the really important work that's going on right now. If you're a member of the W3C or want to be, please reach out to me. It would be great to have you as part of the group. There's a lot of work to get done. And we'll be having a face-to-face meeting for both VCs and DIDs in September as part of the W3C TPAC conference. So something else that happened with DIDs in the last month or so is this intention to standardize DID methods. I mentioned that there are 190 plus DID methods, and a lot of people view that as confusing. And there haven't really been these efforts to make any single DID method or collection of DID methods a standard. And what that means generally is elevating it from a draft or one company's implementation to something that is a lot more robust in terms of the features that you need to implement, different test cases, how you handle different edge cases, how you think about security and privacy considerations and scale, all these really thorough and complex pieces of tech that need to be thought out before we say, okay, this is enough to be a standard that's adoptable by the whole world. So I and some other leaders in the space put together this letter of intent last month to standardize on 3 different classes of DID methods. Now, the methods listed here aren't final yet. They're just kind of ideas based on what we've seen in the community. DID key and DigiWK follow this single key self-resolvable pattern where you don't need to use a web resource at all to get the DID documents content. The second category is a web-based method. Some people don't view this as decentralized really because you rely on websites and the DNS system as many services do today, but there's still value in these types of DID methods. And the last one would be a fully decentralized method like DidDHT, which I'm wearing the shirt of. And these decentralized methods have probably gotten the most scrutiny in the DID community because many people are averse to blockchains and view them as an insufficient technology that really won't gain adoption by governments or large tech companies, or are really inaccessible to the average person because of prohibitive costs or even jurisdictional issues around KYC, that kind of thing. So we're trying to find a way to use an actually decentralized method without a blockchain, which is why DHT is appealing. Certainly we'll consider others. So this letter went out end of last month, and we've already gotten over 80 replies, which has been overwhelming. And that means that 80 plus folks from many different companies, countries, governments, organizations are all interested in the standardization effort. And we're going to start meeting to figure out how we do this in a couple of weeks. We don't have a plan yet, but we're going to figure it out. We don't want to just say, oh, it'll happen at DIF or it'll happen at the W3C. We really want to make it a cross-collaborative effort across all the different folks in the world that are working with DIDs. So this is something I'm really excited about seeing coming to fruition. All right. Link to the letter of intent. Yes, I have a link. If you go to the diff blog, I don't know if you can see my One second. I don't know if you're able to see my, oh, okay, there you go. Okay, so moving on, standards focus area for the next quarter, at least for us at TBD, is to improve the specs that we have and make them really well defined in terms of the features that we're supporting and make sure that they're well tested. One effort to do that is this Web5 spec. We put it into this tool called SpecUp, which Daniel helped develop at Diff to take a step in that direction, to say, here are all the features that we need to support across these different languages. Here's how you know whether you support them or not. And coming next for this effort will be a series of better test vectors. Today, we have this public report that shows compatibility of different features across the different SDKs that we have. And with this updated spec, we'll also have an updated compliance report that will have many more test vectors to be a lot more robust and help us guarantee that interoperability. As mentioned earlier, selective disclosure and trust framework are really big for what the team's trying to do, enabling better privacy controls. And with the V2 data model in the W3C, we'll be able to do selective disclosure. So that's something that we will implement this year, as well as the trust framework, which it's a little too early to say much on, but the broad concept is we want to have a place where different companies can come and agree on a legal and compliant way to trust one another, as I'm a trusted PFI, I'm a trusted credential issuer, I'm a conforming wallet that I could use in a TBDX interaction. And the trust framework will kind of enable those patterns of trust and interactions across TBDX. And of course, keeping pace with the ongoing work in different standards groups, governments, through hackathons and other initiatives, which I'll be able to say more on in the future. There are some exciting things at work, but I can't say a lot just yet, unfortunately. Okay, moving on, I want to talk about the Rust effort a little bit and how it got started. So if we zoom out and think about some of the main projects that TBD is supporting, we have these TBDX SDKs, Web5 SDKs, and projects like the DHG. Of course, there are DWNs and some others too. This is a bit simplified. But if we zoom out, they're not just these SDKs. They're describable in more generic terms. We have capabilities for building on TBDX, capabilities for enabling digital identity, and some infrastructure for that digital identity. And we're trying to think, how is the best way to keep enabling this and supporting this for all the different users at scale? And if we zoom out even more, we think of it, all right, we have tools to build TBDX and other Web5 projects, and also Web5 itself. So where this led us was to distinguishing between what we provide and what we enable. And today, we provide and enable a lot, and the burden on the team can be quite heavy at times to support 12 plus SDKs across languages, the specs, the test vectors, the servers, and change management across these different projects can be pretty complex. So thinking about a shift here to focusing on a smaller surface area that we provide and a larger surface area that we enable is a way to make this more maintainable. And the key here is to adopt a common core. So that really is the impetus for the Rust effort. And based on the TBDX spec and the Web5 spec, the team is working hard to build out Rust SDKs for both TBDX and Web5. And Rust is really unique, very efficient and cool language that we could use to build bindings for many, many other languages. So we could lower our development effort and roll out features more consistently and more quickly across many different languages with this Rust core. We could also use the Rust core as a way to guarantee interoperability in a much nicer way. Because if we pass the test vectors in Rust, then we have good confidence that they'll also pass in the libraries in different languages that we're consuming those bindings in. So I touched on this a little earlier. Here's what that spec looks like. And really, this is what the Rust core will be implementing against for Web 5, and there will be a version of this for TBDX as well. And you could expect in the coming weeks, months, both these pages to be a lot more robust in the vectors that they call out and the features that they test for compatibility for. All right, so what's on deck for the rest of the year? We have TBDX 2.0 out. We've iterated really quickly with a lot of good feedback from the community using TBDX 1, and we'll probably keep iterating and getting more feedback. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's another TBDX version. That Web 5 spec was published last week, and the next effort is to keep improving it, add more test vectors, make it stronger. The Rust effort is still underway. We have done a lot of work internally to prove it out, but we really need to have a goal this year to swap it out for the SDKs that we publish. So most of the SDKs we have today don't rely on this Rust core, but by the end of the year they should. That's a goal for the rest of the year. For DidDHG, as I mentioned, it's part of this broader standardization effort. So I view the spec as it is today as kind of a good starting place, but many things in it will change for the better to make it more scalable, more applicable to different use cases, and more efficient. Something that I started exploring last week is swapping out the representation of the DID documents using CBOR, which is a compact binary representation of JSON objects. So we could possibly store a lot more data in the hash table. As I said, the trust framework is really crucial. Something like the KCC spec that we've developed will be a part of that trust framework as a common way to issue and verify credentials on TBDX, as well as trust PFIs, trust wallets, and really more broadly establish and maintain trust on the TBDX network. And other main goal, like we discussed, adopting these new data models, considering other VC formats like MDLs, and also selective disclosure. And that is it. That's kind of the landscape for our standards for the rest of the year at this point in time, but certainly things might change, and I'm happy to give more of these updates as time goes on. Happy to answer any questions if folks have them.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, thank you so much for presenting all those updates for us, Gabe. Feel free to post it in the chat within the next few minutes. If not, we'll be ending the stream soon. But yeah, is there any? You mentioned earlier how it's the resolution that is like one of the biggest pieces. Um, has it been very difficult to work towards this standardization when it comes to the decentralized web?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, People view decentralization in different ways, and they might say having a common way to resolve may hurt decentralization or make us reliant on common web servers. It's a common complaint in the Ethereum ecosystem that claims to be this decentralized blockchain, but maybe 90% of traffic goes through the same infrastructure providers or MetaMask. Um, so we definitely want to avoid those kind of centralization points in DID infrastructure. It's a consideration, but we don't have an answer yet of how to do that. But at least having a common API or a common way to communicate what is in a DID document and how to access it is a step towards enabling interoperability And yes, then we'll need to think about decentralization as well. I think one way to do it is by saying there are many ways to access a single uh, did document. You don't have to rely on single resolvers, and the software should make that really easy to either do a round robin type thing or to not choose the same server each time. So it's a more decentralized approach.
Awesome. Another question I had, because I think the uh, much of our viewers are have just really enjoyed the general updates, and they don't have any specific questions just at the moment. But um, is there, aside from that piece, when it comes to resolution, is there any specific uh, goal when it came to the roadmap that you're most excited for?
Yeah, I think um, in the past few years, a lot of the different components that make up Web 5 have been in progress, and we're reaching a place where they're more mature and implemented by a lot of different folks. So seeing them all come together and having this data economy flow is what I'm most excited for. So having things like common credential formats, a common trust model, common DID methods, and having real transactions, user experiences powered by them is what I'm most excited for. And it's kind of existed in pockets before, but really this year, next year are when I think we'll see a lot more interoperability and more interesting experiences built with these tools.
Yeah. And I can definitely agree. I find the potential use cases and them, the solutions to those use cases being solved as the most interesting, because when it comes to uh the decentralization of the web as a whole, that can be a lot to grasp at times, because like what does that mean in my day-to-day life? Um the immediate use case that helped me onboard to it and understand like the purpose of it and how it can change my life is like things like accessibility of your information, being able to share what you need to, as just one uh aspect of it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And at least in the US, I think over half the states are working on mobile driver's license efforts. In the EU, there's this EIDAS effort that's going into effect in the coming years. They already have version one, but the new version is coming in the coming years. So a lot of governments are buying into this too, and we'll be seeing it in more places.
Yeah. I'm definitely excited for that. All what the decentralized web means for me, and I think can mean for a lot of people, is inherently accessibility. I think, you know, what it means to have a level of control of your data, or, um, you know, how you're connecting to one another, can just mean that you have more accessibility to other people without having to uh, be super public with everything. Um, I see one question from our Discord. Let me just highlight that really fast. It might just be a quick little thing. Let's see. So, someone in our Discord asked, why isn't TBD listed as a member, partner, or contributor on Identity Foundation site?
That's a great question. I don't know, and I will follow up on that. Thanks for flagging.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I didn't realize that either. You definitely not intentional. All right. I see someone else is also typing, but yeah. Any questions at all, you guys? But we'll just be here for a minute or two. Are there any, in the meantime, just to ask, are there any potential contributions that you would maybe want from the community towards this effort now or in the future?
I think the most interesting thing would be if folks are implementing verifiable credentials or DID methods, please reach out. We're working on some test suites specifically for the V2 data model for credentials, and we need more implementers. So if you're working on your own implementation, please reach out. It'll be great to have more contributors. Of course, we'll be using the Web5 SDKs as part of that interop as well.
Yeah, and if you want to join, feel free to join in our Discord, and that's where you will be able to connect with us directly. I see the question posted. Let's see. So, y'all have made a ton of progress. What do you see as the largest hurdles to overcome over the next, year, 2 years?
I think more proving out real use cases. Like we have all the building blocks, now we need to build. And I think the problems that we'll run into, we probably can't even anticipate today. So
Yeah,
it's about getting it in people's hands, getting feedback, and seeing how we could adapt.
yeah, I definitely can agree and add on to that. Where when it comes to everybody, like you all tuning in today, or people that are learning about web 5 and the decentralized web for the first time, um, everyone cares to see the proof and the use cases and how that can actually impact you. So that will be coming. We're in the initial stages, but very exciting. And another question from Discord is, what do you feel are the top use cases, or is the top use case that you know about?
Yeah, a lot of use cases I'm familiar with that are common in the space are around government identity, whether it's proving you're a citizen to vote or to get a local permit or to show to a cop that you have a valid license. Those are less interesting to me. I think more private sector or developer focused use cases would be really cool. Like some of the stuff built on DWNs that have been present in previous events here. Those are interesting to me, as well as, of course, TBDX. I think if we could show off real financial services powered by this tech, that would be a really great thing to counterbalance the government focus that's pretty prevalent in our space.
Yeah,
And
I
I'm yeah.
no, sorry, continue.
No, I'm also curious for other non-government use cases too, but TBDX is number one for me because I'm at TBD.
I definitely agree and echo that statement. I think TB would just change a lot of lives, even in my personal life, and a lot of people I know overseas. And, the workforce has become very global, with remote work and everything, but still many people are not able to, let's just say, uh, work for different companies across the world that they want to, because, getting paid is an issue. Or, uh, yeah, let me see. So these are the use cases this Discord member, Rewired, mentioned as the most interesting to them. Government identity, as you mentioned, the developer sector, and yeah, plus wanting that TBDEX is for sure very interesting. So yeah. All right, everybody. That will be all for our questions for today. Any last comments, Gabe?
No, please reach out. I'm on Discord. Would love to hear from you anytime.
Yeah, we're both in our, we're all, most much of the TBD team is in our Discord. So definitely join and ask any questions, or if you need help building, you'll be able to reach us directly there. You can also find Gabe on Twitter at decentralgame, and you can find me on Twitter as well at Tanya Shiba if you'd like to. So yeah. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.